have you ever reflected on who was the best boss you ever had and the worst? And if you're sitting next to your boss now and it's the worst, you have my sympathies. I've been there. And I've had both, right? Lou, you've been a manager forever. You were probably a best for most people. There's a lot of really great managers here. But I had some good ones. I worked for an astronaut. That's kind of cool, right? Worked for the father of the kid who brought the internet down in 1988. That was kind of cool. I had some pretty interesting bosses. But one thing that a couple of them that I worked for used to do that I always thought was good, and I've always tried to do it, is towards the end of the year, bring folks together and then reflect back on what they learned. I don't know how many of you do that. If you manage a team, I recommend it. Duncan's here. Duncan's seen some pretty good managers. Just getting up and just having honest conversation about things that have been observed and learned is the best kind of conversation. It's the inverse of some of the stuff that you do get in a keynote. We've all been to those keynotes where there's somebody at a podium and they're saying words, but it feels like they're reading from a template or something, and they're saying things that aren't, in any way connecting. So I try and do just the opposite. I remove all the filters, and I get up here and I try and share what I learned. Now, why would you want to hear from me? It's because I have the weirdest, most unique, craziest job since I left AT&T. Kind of going after Gartner a little bit, right? So I'm trying to be the industry analyst that people can listen to and get unbiased, sort of unfiltered guidance on. That's the idea. I don't think we have much industry analysis in our industry at all. We get a lot of pay-for-play stuff, which is not my favorite. But here's what I do. I get up in the morning and I talk to cybersecurity vendors. I talk to government because I deal through Applied Physics Lab. At Hopkins, I have a part-time advisory role for Applied Physics Lab. I deal with graduate students all the time. I teach at NYU and Stevens. And I talk with businesses. I coach some CSOs and CSO teams. I do consulting. So I've been able to completely immerse myself in this field in government, academia, technology, business, and internationally. There's a lot, but probably a good 10 to 15% of the people in the room here are non-US. So I feel like it's my obligation to come up and say, here's what I'm kind of learning, and if there's one or two things that you pick out of that help you, then it was probably worth you attending. Because I've been to a lot of keynotes where I just go, oh, dear Lord, I'm going to go do my email. This is going to be one of those. Where it's like, they say these aphorisms that we all agree with, security is hard, and I know that, whatever. So, and I don't have the encumbrance of an organization making sure that what I say is politically correct either, as you may have noticed already today. So that helps as well. So so I'm going to tick through 10 things. And again, I'm just copying some really great leaders that I had that would do this. And I remember as a young pup thinking, this is good. And I started taking notes, and I always thought that was a good thing to do. First thing, let me tell you a little story about as we select companies to do business with. And when I say do business, it means we do a little bit of sort of for pay business with a very small number of vendors, only when we can help. If we can write content or we can do some video that helps them, we'll do that. But I start with 1,600 companies that we track and connect with, and we'll write a one-pager on them. Then I break that into about 400 that I try and connect with the management, understand what they're doing. Then out of that, I'll blog about 200. All this is for free. Again, we're trying to be the un-Gartner, which means the un-money. Maybe that's not the best business plan, and then out of those 200, it's 30 or 40 or so that we'll do business with. And you know what I noticed? When I get down to about 200 on their way down, almost all of them are run by white males who look like me. Jen here is my friend, who I'm glad she's sitting in the front because she's my muse on this. I think when you go back and look at your supply chain, as I reflect back, I tended to buy a lot of things from companies that look like and seem like me, look like me. There's a lot of inherent bias there. And I'm like this New York guy, academic guy, I'm like all this open-minded thing. And my team looked and they go, hey, look at like I was going to put faces of people that we deal with. And I said, I can't put that up. It looks like that really does not look appropriate. I didn't do that on purpose. I'm busy. I didn't think about that. And I think, what are you doing in your own source selection? What have we done in our source selection for years? Do we buy from and deal with companies that look exactly like us? I don't know. An open-ended point, maybe something to ponder with your team. Go back, I used to do this for years. Go figure out who your top 10 or 15 suppliers are in cybersecurity and do some sort of demographics on where they are, what they look like, this, that. And make sure you're buying the best technology and you're not buying from the most comfortable delivery sources of that technology. Does that make sense? I think that kind of learning for me that frankly was a little jarring. So that's number one. Here's number two. I've written a bunch of books, and I don't think anybody ever read any of them, and I'm not sure anybody reads books anymore. Like they would sell, but I think I could write on page 387, and then a miracle happens, and I don't think anybody would call me out on it. But you know what I think people do now? They watch video. Isn't that crazy? And it never became more clear to me than now. My graduate students demand video. Avi and I both are professors. I sit in a big lecture. I'll have a group almost as big as this. I teach every week, and they're all, where's the video? So for those of you who are kind of in the business of selling, I guess that's how people consume information now. They watch video. I did these 180 Coursera lectures. I get 50 notes a week from people saying, I read all these books. No, nothing. And it's kind of a bummer because I used to tell my students who want to learn something, you've got to sit down, put your feet down, get the paper, read the darn thing, get your mind not bouncing from here to there, oh, my back hurts, oh, what am I going to do this afternoon? But focus on the work. And if your mind's wandering, stop. Now, when I watch people who are like learning, machine learning 101, they're watching an MIT professor on their iPhone while they're video gaming and maybe driving at the same time, and you go, what? So, look, I share a generation with a lot of you. If you're trying to communicate technology with large groups of people, I've come to the conclusion, as somebody who writes for a living, that maybe I'm like one of those old rock journalists. The rock journalists used to say, we're people who can't write, talking about people who can't talk for people who don't read. Maybe that's, when you write tech stuff, is that what we're dealing with? All of you are writing white papers. And so I've shifted a lot toward video. I've built a studio. As many of my articles that I push out are video interviews now. And I seem to get better response from that. I don't know if I like that or don't like that, but I wanted to share that with you because it seems absolutely positively clear to me that this is the way people consume information now. So take that back to your team. That means awareness programs at work, any of the types of things that would normally have been communicated in writing probably should be video. Here's the third thing. This one's most interesting. 2 years ago, I not only was not on social media, I was one of those people who would say those things, are said about social media. It's a bunch of nonsense, all these collisions, a bunch of jerks on social media. What are you doing that for? Oh my God, I would never be on insert name of social media. But 2 years ago, I decided I was going to try it because I was writing these articles and I thought, am I going to get them out? So I started publishing on LinkedIn and on Twitter and on a bunch of other forums where I syndicate. And what I found was, it is possible to have an excellent experience on social media if you know what you're doing. If you avoid collisions, if you don't respond to nonsense, if you provide value. And you know what happened? And listen, I'm not some guy, I'm the antithesis of the social media community. I'm an old fart professor who still likes to write with chalk on a board. But since then, I've gotten I've averaged 500 followers on LinkedIn per day. I'm approaching 30,000. These are curated, so people like you. And I'm able to communicate like this with a big swath of our community. These are cybersecurity people. If somebody sends me a connection request and it's from something that looks ridiculous, I say no. But if it's like the deputy CSO for a financial services firm, it's yes. Or I'm a threat researcher at someplace, yes. If I'm do cyber policy, it's yes. So it's like this amazingly curated list. Where the hell can you get that now? Here's the learning for all of you. Now that I'm Mr. Social Media, in fact, my daughter, as a joke, it was my birthday earlier, she bought me this plaque as a joke that said, Edward Amoroso, LinkedIn influencer, which I'm not, but we all laugh because I'm always bragging. I'm like, I send my daughter a note and I'll be like, Dad's it. I'll say, Dad's social media is exploding. I had like 300 people that contacted me today to be on, and I get, all these monster hits on these articles. But here's what I notice. In a lot of companies, you've delegated the social media to someone, and you're missing out if you're the boss because there are customers there. And I mean raw connections with real paying customers. So if you got, and there's some people here probably are going, oh, don't say this. I do social media in my company. If you're running a company, if you're running an organization, if you're an academic get yourself directly involved in the social media, because if you're not, you're missing an awful lot. You would not believe the opportunities I see missed. I'll publish an article about a company, and then there'll be all these notes that'll come in going, oh, I really like this. Hey, where can I learn more? And I'll say, check in with the team. And then there's crickets, where there's real leads, because I know the people posting, and I'm thinking, well, that's a real amazing lead. They read the thing, they took the time to respond, and maybe some social media person 8 levels down from the CEO will send a PDF off, totally missing an opportunity. So if you're a boss, and you're like I was, where you think, social media, you shouldn't. It should be, wow, social media. And that's hard for me to say, because I used to make fun of it just voraciously as kind of a joke, where you just collide with completely crazy people, who wants to be there. If you know what you're doing, it can be quite a opportunity. Number 4, and this will play off some of the things you heard from Dick. Through my work at APL and also AT&T, some AT&T folks here, still my very close partner. I do a lot of work for them. I'm able to stay connected to DHS, DISA, and the U.S. federal government very closely. Do a lot of work. You heard we mentioned Rob Joyce before he got fired. I was doing some work with him. Stay pretty close, pretty connected. And I think we've reached a crisis point now where it's almost impossible to convince somebody to do cybersecurity in government. We are at a crisis point. Think about it. You can take your salary and almost go 4 or 5x up if you work at DHS or a place like that by just quitting and taking a job, say here in New York City. That is an inherently unstable problem. And a further problem that I feel in my gut, because I spent my whole life supporting government. My dad was 35 years in the Army, is that for me, when I thank someone who's in the military, I mean it. My dad had that as his career. But when you meet somebody in a civilian agency, you don't stop and thank them for their service. Maybe you do in Canada, I don't know. We don't do it here. Here we disdain them. It's government waste or something. And maybe there's a lot of government waste. I've stood in line at the post office, muttering that, well, my tax, I'm not curmudgeon. I went to school in Hoboken. That's what I do. I complain for a living. But when somebody is working, for example, at CS&C or in DHS, they're doing it, and we really need to find a way to make them stay and to thank them. They're making nothing. They don't make a lot of money. They take a lot of crap from all of us. They have an impossible job. They have an architecture that's way behind. They're asked to do Einstein 3. Wow, what is that? Still DMZ stuff. And you guys are all doing virtualized distributed cloud with Bitcoin and adaptive auth and machine learning. And it's exciting where we are, where they are. It's like, you know, here's your simulated wood grain finish answering machine. Doesn't that look great? I mean, that's what we have at DHS. It is a crisis right now. And it's something that I think we all as leaders need to figure something out. I've begged President Trump's team to do a real cyber corps, to do something that will really get young people into civilian agencies, pay their 4 years of college. You know, I'm trying to do something that's tagged cyber, trying to train, paying these kids minimum wage to teach them cybersecurity to get them off, but that's not going to help government. So I don't know that this has an answer, but you guys are a swath of our community. You're carefully selected. If you're here, you're part of a mosaic that we put together each year. There's some repeat folks, people that we work with come to our conference each year, but more than half of you have never been here before, and next year it'll be more than half that are different. So when I talk to you, there's a multiplier effect. You need to make sure you're talking to your teams, your leadership teams, about what do we do about this crisis in government. So that's number one. Now, I don't know if we're up to 4 or 5, but the next thing I've noticed may be even more serious. You heard Dick talk about intellectual property theft. Here's my fear. Other than some vendors, technology companies that are creating sort of interesting stuff, and that's always with a profit motive, the research community in cybersecurity is, as far as I'm concerned, dried up. There is no more. Why is it? Because why would you do that? Like, you see Avi, the guy is awesome. The reason he's sitting here is because that guy can make $1 million a minute working for a bank. Instead, he teaches at Hopkins, makes 1/10 it, but he gets to play in poker tournaments and take his boat around. I get the advantage. I'm just saying, the research community that was so vibrant in the 80s and 90s in cybersecurity is dead. So I worry that what is it that the Chinese and others would want to steal from us anyway? Do any of you read technical journals? I do, these IEEE journals. Go grab an IEEE journal, a recent one, like special issue on machine learning and artificial intelligence. You'll find 15 papers in there, really amazing. 14 of them will be from universities outside the United States. The 15th will be mostly from somebody outside the United States, with maybe one researcher from a school here. And that's the journal. Go back 20 years, it was the reverse. It would be Carnegie Mellon, MIT, NYU. All these schools would be doing the research. It has completely flipped, and it is a crisis. If you're not doing research, then 10 years from now, you ain't got anything. I don't care what and I know there are a lot of wonderful technology companies here, and I provided the parenthetical that except for, you know, companies that have this profit motive, want to build something creative, that's awesome. That's all we have now. Where are the great breakthroughs? Name the last 4 great breakthroughs. We sit here and we talk about the icons in our industry, and we refer to Whit Diffie, and he mentioned Ron Rivest. These are guys that did their work in the 70s, for crying out loud. Who do we have now? Where's the research in cybersecurity? I don't think there is one. That's a sobering concept. That's something we need to be embarrassed about. So I don't know what the answer is. Again, I told you I wanted to tell you unfiltered, this is what I've observed, this is what I see. And I'm immersing myself every day. It's all I do. I read, I talk, I interview, I travel, I go, I tour this place, I sit through the worst talks, the best talks, the average talk, everything. And I don't see any research going on. So that is a problem. Now here's the next one. This is an interesting one. This is one for, there's some bigger companies here that are represented. They tend to be more quiet. If you have a PR firm, you know, that then they tell you when you go to Ed's conference, you better shut up, because somebody might tweet out what he's doing. They consider me a dangerous wild card, but they come, but sit quietly. I won't call any of them out, but some of the biggest companies in the world are here. Here's a little hint. That local area network that you're still on behind the DMZ, that's still vulnerable. Just because you talk cloud doesn't mean you're not still unbelievably vulnerable to attacks. And you want to know something? Every little company has figured that out and no longer has a local area network. Now think about that. When we say, because if you're pitching your product, you go, the enterprise network requires, and that always meant something. Now I'll go like this. I'll go, wait a minute. They go, what, you stopped me already? I go, yeah. You know, what's the question? I go, what enterprise network? Well, what are you talking about? They go, well, you know, like the firewall. You have a firewall. I go, I don't have a firewall. You don't have a firewall? I go, yeah, a little company. What do I need a firewall for? We sit in a darn WeWork. I got a bunch of clouds, and we all have iPhones. What? So where's the LAN? Where's the enterprise LAN? Larger companies still have them, and it tricks technology firms into believing that that enterprise LAN is always going to be there. Take it from me, Mr. Circuit Switched, and Pete over there, and a few of the people here, that Duncan and Stan and Andy McCool in the back. I notice I glommed a lot of AT&T people into Tag Cyber. Every one of them will tell you that the best years, the best times, the most upbeat, promising, we are really kicking ass years for Circuit Switched were 5 minutes before the floor fell out. So once that enterprise LAN goes away, which will be a good thing, by the way, if you are dependent in any of your work on an enterprise LAN, you better rethink that. And if you work in a large company, you have something nice to look forward to. My capability to do IT went up, not down, when I left a large company. When I went from big company with big team and curated capability to just me with my backpack, I felt quickly that my ability to do information technology went up. That's a little weird, isn't it? Like, wow, I used to work at Boeing building aircrafts, and we had all this stuff. But then when I quit and it was me and my backpack, it was way easier to build aircrafts. Who the hell says that? You know, never say that. But you say that about IT. Lou, you might have a similar experience, right? So that's something to keep in mind, something that I see. And I notice that the bigger the company, the less you understand that. The smaller the company, the more readily you understand that. You get that very quickly. A corollary to that is that the perimeter is still in place for far too many companies. You're still relying on a perimeter. And here's the only observation. We're in this delusion where people believe that if they talk about perimeter dissolution and talk about cloud, that somehow absolves the sin of still having one. Like if you just talk about it, then we're great. Well, no. If it's still there, it's still there. We just saw a couple of big, massive breaches recently. I didn't go and dig into the details. Some of you probably did. I just went, oh boy. But you know what happened there. It's always these north-south break-in, east-west traversal, and then I head out the back door with all your stuff. I mean, it's been that way for 20 years, and as long as people have that architecture, it's going to continue happening. And when you go on TV and people say, how does this keep happening? You say, well, it's what Einstein or anybody would say. Like, it's crazy to think that if you're doing the same thing and you expect a different result, you know, what's the, right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It makes absolutely no sense that you would expect there to be a different result if you're doing the same thing. So perimeter is an issue. And then again, a corollary to that is that I do sense, and you probably hear this as well, that cloud has come to the point where the regulators are a little less freaked about it, right? You see that? I saw that in 2018. Last year when I sat with this group, we all lamented that there's still way too many people saying public cloud just was, there's no way that's ready for prime time. It's more ready for prime time. I think we all know that. And if you watch what Amazon and Microsoft and Google are doing and others that are in the cloud, seems like every day Amazon is either buying a company or introducing 37 more features, right? It's unbelievable. Now, here's the reason I bring that up. People will say, well, gosh, I don't like putting all my eggs into one virtual basket. Well, you kind of already did that with Verizon and AT&T, didn't you? As soon as you decided you're going to use somebody else's network, well, your data's already flying out the door with a carrier. So why shouldn't it fly out the door with a carrier and park with somebody else? Like, what the heck's the difference? And another thing that comes up is all this stream of consciousness, but as I'm talking, I flash back in my mind to these meetings where I'm listening and I'm thinking, do I say it or not? And this past year, I've generally said it, but a lot of times I've been talking to larger companies and they say, we don't do cloud. And then they describe their architecture and their 37,000 suppliers. And I go, for God's sakes, to those 37,000 suppliers, you are the cloud. You have a portal, you set it on the internet, they connect. Are you better than Amazon? You have 4 people tending to your portal for 37,000 suppliers. Are you better than Amazon, yes or no? And sometimes they'll go, yes. And I go, okay. I catch my train back. Notice that's often in Washington. So look, time to stop deluding ourselves. The perimeter's not a good architecture. Local area networks are dying. And the cloud has become a place that you need to pay some attention to. Take advantage of what you can attend. If you're a big monster company, build your own cloud. OpenStack's cheap, computers are cheap, go for it. If you're not, ask yourself, are you better than Amazon? If you're not, you shouldn't be doing it. Now, 2 remaining things that I want to address before we bring Sean up. One is, there's been a lot of discussion around supply chain, particularly foreign supply chain, and in particular China. I told you I was going to remove the filters here. I've tried to stay away from the topic. Like anytime the topic of these things come up, it seems like I don't really want to deal with that, so I've said no to everything. I got a call from like the Consulate General of China asking if I'd come give a talk, and half the email was in Chinese, and I went, whoa, what is this? And I said, you know what? Yes, I'm coming. So I said I would come, and I'm glad I'm going. And we're going to talk about supply chain, and we had a prep call, and I think they'd like to have a heart attack when they heard what I said I want to talk about. But here's what I want them to hear and what I want everybody to hear. It is virtually impossible, and we know this from Ken Thompson's Turing lecture in the 80s, to detect when somebody drops a Trojan horse into software. That's just a fact. This idea that a bunch of, white lab coat wearing computer scientists with gloves will go into a place and look at the design documentation, review the source code, tour the data center, interview the developers, look at the documentation again, interview the developers again, double check, and then come back and sit in front of a dais and very gravely and seriously confirm that we've checked it out and everything's fine. That is utter bunk. But it has nothing to do with Chinese, it has to do with software. That it's simple. Go back and read Reflections on Trusting Trust. If you've never read that, it is the most important paper that's ever been written in cybersecurity. We can call it then, it's computer security. But Ken Thompson shows how you dissolve Trojan horses down the translation path right into the hardware, if you like. So I can make things invisible, I can commit the perfect crime. So when you're doing supply chain, if you think that inspecting software is going to make any difference, it's not. The story you got from Avi was accurate. When there's just bad code being written, review the code and you go, look at this, you got trap doors in here and all this stuff. If the team that had been writing that software for Diebold had wanted it to be invisible, if they'd called me, I could have shown them how to make it invisible to people like Avi. Just a hint here is you can go into the compiler and the compiler says, oh, I see this clean stuff. Well, I've been programmed to look for the clean stuff, but actually translate dirty stuff. So the code looks great, but the object's all broken. Oh, you're going to look at the object code? Well, the object code being loaded into and translated via an assembler to machine code, just the object code looks great, but write binary that's dirty. Oh, you want to do that with binary? You get the point. You can work your way down. You can commit the perfect crime. So this idea that having great people like Avi go in and review source code to find out if election software is okay, that's great for now, but if somebody really wants to get it past him, you can. So that's even more depressing. That's an order of magnitude more depressing than what you heard today. So keep that in mind as you do source selection. It is not easy to determine that there may be some sort of errant implantation software. By the way, how do you find errant code from a vendor that may be untrustworthy? What do? You bribe somebody? I don't think that's a good idea. Maybe if you work in the CIA, you do that. You put plants into their developer group? That doesn't sound so good either. You trick them. Like what we all discovered, Checkpoint had a problem in the 90s. Remember the firewall where people were calling up going, oh my gosh, I can't get into my firewall, I'm having problems. And we all noticed that if they had the IP address of your firewall, they could get in. And we went, thank you, comma, however, how'd you do that? It's like, oh, we didn't tell you? Like this way we can get in. We go, I would have liked to know that. You know, you can get into my firewall. And again, that presumably was there for maintenance purposes, but I don't know. How'd we find out? By accident. So supply chain in 2018 into 2019 for software is a mess because legislators don't get it. Liam and I are going over to visit with a senator in a week or so to explain this, and I'm talking to the senator's team, and they're going, you can't show the senator source code. And I said, oh, yes, I can. So I'm literally bringing charts with source code in to, maybe for the first time in the history of ever, show source code to a senator. We'll see how that goes. I'll let you go. We're charging them like for a couple of hours of work, and they're like, oh, there'll be a lot of follow-on. And I'm thinking, I don't think there's going to be much follow-on from this one. So we will see. Now, here's the last thing. This is for my friends here who do technology. If you're building a product or a service that you're selling. And I just want to give you my heartfelt belief in what I think differentiates companies that succeed from ones that don't. When I ask someone what they do, they can usually answer that. When I ask people why they do it, most can't answer that. There's a couple of ladies here I can ask, they know why they do what they do. Like they'd be happy to tell you what they do, but they can tell you why. So here is the secret, and don't tell anybody outside this room. I'm going to give you the secret that if you can do this, you'll be the next unicorn. Are you ready? Carolyn knows what I'm going to say because I told her yesterday. If you can sell your product without describing what it is, you'll succeed. Here's an example. Our old buddy Kevin Mandia, we all know him. He says, hey, I work at the FBI, probably work with Sean. And we get all these calls, 100 people call, and we don't have the resources to help but maybe one of them. So my dream is to get some of my friends. We're going to set up a company. We're going to help the other 99. Would you like to be part of what we're doing? Yes, Kevin, I would. Sign me up. Oh, by the way, what are you selling? How about you heard Keith Alexander earlier. Here's Keith's story. Well, I love my country. If that meant going to Vietnam, I went. If that meant a career in the military, I did it. That means go to Iraq, get shot at, I did it. If it means go to Washington, I did it. Run NSA, did it. Start US Cyber Command, check. But then I realized the real front is in industry. Who'd have thought? So I figure I had to take my learning, my lifetime of training, bring it to industry, and start a company focused on industry. Would you like to be part of that? Yes, General, sign me up. By the way, what are you selling? Get the point? When I ask people what they're doing, they can tell me. When I ask people why they do it, they usually can't. But if you can figure out the answer to that, what you believe in, what's driving you, then you will succeed. There's a lot of people, here's a good one. Talk to a lot of folks where I'll hear the story, and it's interesting. I'm not a total nag. I'll say, what do you do? And then they start talking. I'm like, I take my notes. And then at the end, I'll go, oh, by the way, tell me a little bit about yourself. And then you find out that this person quit their job. They've been dreaming of doing this forever. And they put everything on the line. They sold their house. And you go, why didn't you start with that? Like, if you told me that you quit your job, you put everything on the line, and you're really going to do this, Just, duh. What are the chances of that person succeeding versus somebody who tells you that the reason their product is important is because we have a better GUI than these other guys, and our machine learning is a little bit more accurate and tuned, and that we're based on computer vision, not on this other thing. So obviously we would be better. And I go, well, maybe so, but what if the other guy gets those 3 features? Then what? And you go, well, they won't. They're a bunch of dummies. And I go, oh, okay. I've got to go catch my train. You get the point? So that is the secret. Like with Tag Cyber, here's what I do. There's no commercial, just an example. People go, tell me about Tag Cyber. I go, here's the deal. Worked for 31 years in this business, what I love doing. I'd probably do it for free. Don't tell Randall Stevenson I said that. It's for the money back. But I'd have done it for free. I loved it. And I write, I teach. This is what I do. If you told me that I couldn't make another penny the rest of my life, I'd keep doing the same thing every day. I love doing this. But the main thing I wanted to do is disrupt something. And I thought industry analysis needs a little disruption. And it seems a little mischievous and seems kind of fun. Maybe I'll get some kids together and we'll go have at it. Hey, would you like to be part of that? Yes, Ed. By the way, what are you selling? Get the point? It's A or B. Go back and look at your message with your team. And if you're leading with what you do and you don't have a why, you got a problem. That make sense? Good.